Okay, it looks like everyone is back. We are going to continue with our next session for tonight, Excelling at Project Management, brought to you by Megan Deville of Mid-South and Jennifer Tucker of Texoma.
Yay.
All.
Thank you so much, Faye. Jennifer and I promise to make this the most exciting presentation you will ever hear about project management. So never fear, you will not fall asleep on this Friday night listening to a really boring presentation on project management. Jennifer, you want to get us started with our housekeeping items?
Yeah, so just to let you know, there's going to be a quiz on this one in the middle of the presentation. That's how we keep it fun. So we'll use the chat to look at your answers. So please make sure to click the little dialog box at the bottom. We're just going to use the Zoom chat for it. And then we'll also be reserving a little bit of time at the end for questions. And we will answer those the best we can, but we also have a dedicated Slack channel if you want to talk about something more related to a specific inquiry.
Yeah, and I have actually pre-populated the Slack channel with some of the documents that I'll be referencing tonight. If you're just like really jazzed about project management templates, they're out there and you can look at them, but we'll be introducing them throughout the presentation today. So I think that one is NatCon 2020 Project Management is the name of the channel. You may need to search for it. So without further ado, Jennifer, would you like to introduce yourself?
I would. So if you look, my face matches my picture. So I'm currently the treasurer of JETAA Texoma. I lived in Shimane from 2009 to 2011. I did see that Dawn also lived in Shimane, so woohoo, I'm so excited. So I'm a project manager at a manufacturing company right now. I've got a PMP certification, which is not PIMP, it is Project Management Professional. And I have worked on engineered to order manufacturing projects for about 9 years now, ranging in value from $500K to $10 million. Outside of that, project management activities I've been in, I like grueling vacation planning where you get up at the beginning of the day and you fall over at the end of the night because you spilled the day so much. And that does take some planning. And then also I like planning house parties.
Excellent. Once we're not BC, but AC after COVID, I hope to go to one of your house parties. So keep that in mind.
Really fun.
So my name is Megan Deville. If you were friends with me on Facebook, my name is Megan Geck there. I've been married for 5 years and yet. So I'm the president for Mid-South chapter, which covers Louisiana, Mississippi, and Arkansas. I was in Aomori from 2009 to 2010. I know there's some Tohoku people out there. My day job is as an HRIS analyst, which I just tell people means that I'm the HR computer nerd. So I make sure that all the benefits systems and recruiting systems and all of that stuff work properly. And my project management experience is much more casual. It's kind of been a teach it to yourself out of desperation activity. And I use my project management skills to manage implementation of HR technology and process improvements for a global company of about 3,000 employees. And I have also utilized them at varying degrees of success as Mid-South president for about 8 years or so. And I'm also the logistics coordinator for my own nerd band, and most recently have simultaneously coordinated a music video, a high production show, a CD that's not done yet, and a manga. So, you know, plenty of ways to do projects. So let's talk about the philosophy of projects before we get into some of the nuts and bolts. I have stolen this phrase from a very wise person named Bahia Simons Lane, who recently told me, if you need something done, ask a busy person. And why should you ask a busy person? And the answer is because they're busy. They're too busy to do anything other than get a task done as efficiently and effectively as possible. So some of you guys remember my presentation from last year. I'm a small chapter leader. I only have 2 other officers. I'm serving as president, treasurer, and webmaster simultaneously. So that means that in the tiny amount of time that I have to do JET stuff, I need my projects to be very lean or they're never going to happen. So how do I do that? I like to use the KISS technique, and I didn't know that this had a formal name until Jennifer brought this technique to the table, but it's so key and it's super simple. So I can't tell if you guys are laughing because everybody's muted, but I hope that you are, and I'm laughing inside of my heart. So let's dig in a little bit to understand why it's really critical to keep it simple. A project is really a piece of work that's not a standard process or operation within your organization. So for us, really the only standard operation that we have is GIA. Everything else that we do is a project, and arguably sometimes GIA is a project in and of itself. So what are some of the things that we do that could be considered a project? Obviously, if you're putting on an event, whether that's in person or digital, but it could also be planning a membership campaign, revising your bylaws, trying to obtain 501c3 status. Jennifer, I think you have some nightmares about that one.
We're still working on it.
Preparing for your election cycle or any idea that you have for your chapter is a project. And Jennifer reminded me about the amazing opportunity that US JETAA has where you can partner with them and use a Saskawa Peace Foundation grant to do an amazing project. So there are a lot of opportunities for us to engage in projects. And what a project means is it has a start date, has an end date, has some type of a planned goal that you're trying to achieve. Now, project management seems complicated, but it isn't, and it doesn't need to be. Project management is the way that you organize and manage resources that are necessary to complete your project, event, whatever you want to call it. Project management can be as robust as you need it to be, like if you're seeking 501c3 status, or it can be as simple as you need to reach your goals, which is just jotting down all of the important things that you need to think about before you embark on this journey. Jennifer, you have
Our
anything
goal
to
with
add?
this presentation today is just to give you guys a toolbox. You definitely don't have to do every single one of these things. In fact, unless you're doing something really crazy, I wouldn't recommend doing every single one of these things. But this is just to give you a framework to take you through the process of doing a project from beginning to end.
So this graphic, it looks a little bit corporate and scary, but if you just take a quick look at the bubbles, you have 5 main steps. So you have an idea, you define your idea, you execute your idea. As you're executing the idea, you're keeping track of what's happening to make sure that you're meeting your goals and your timeline, and then you close out your project. So we're going to go into each of these pieces a little bit more. A couple more housekeeping items before we get into the meat of this. Some key tools that I find really helpful in project management is Google Drive or some other type of technology that allows you to very easily share information, and if possible, let everyone collaborate and work on the same version of a document. So if any of you are lucky enough to have Microsoft Teams at work, absolutely love Teams for that. In JET, we use Google Drive. Jennifer and I actually created this presentation simultaneously while using Google Drive. So love Google Drive for that. Our 2 main documents that we're going to talk about today are a project summary, which is also known as your project scope or your project charter. And this document is really just how you're going to jot down the major goals and parameters of your project. It's going to define what you will and what you will not do as part of this project. And it's going to be the foundation for your timeline and for accountability on your project. And then very generically named is some type of progress tracking document. It's really just there to remind us what our goal is and what we will and will not do, which is the scope for our project, helps us maintain our timeline, and it helps give us clarity of ownership of tasks and who is accountable for completing those tasks. So why should we bother with project management? This is from a Forbes article that I found very easily on Google when I went to look for reasons that we should write goals down. It's because people who very vividly describe or picture their goals are anywhere from 1.2 to 1.4 times more likely to successfully accomplish their goals than people who don't. And that's for any type of goal, whether that's a personal goal or whether that is something for your JET chapter, for work, etc. So my last presentation last year had the, what was it? The small chapter cycle of doom. This one is a little bit more positive. This is my circle of my project cycle of success. So if you utilize a standardized way, just a regular habitual way to think through projects, then you are more likely to have a successful project. Additionally, as you do your project, you are actively documenting your project. So we had a really great presentation from our Canada rep about using this downtime while we can't be as active to go back and document stuff. Don't go back and document things. Document as you do things by creating documentation that is helpful in the moment and after the moment. So at the time that you finish your project, you've already successfully documented your project, and now it's saved somewhere that you can reference later. It's also going to help you build a library of multiple successful projects that are going to help facilitate, sorry, I can't speak English tonight, that ever elusive, sustainable, and successful officer transition by leaving your future officers a standardized way to understand what you've done in the past rather than an ad hoc method every time we put a different project together by a different person. And then ideally, our pie in the sky goal is if we can nationally agree for the most part on how we're thinking through our projects, then it makes it easier for us to share things across chapters as well, and potentially have a single national repository of chapter documentation that we can go in and browse. So project management, I'm going to break this down because project management sounds all scary and corporate. It really just, for our purposes, means thinking through and writing down what you want to do. So first, we've gotten ourselves in a mindset of keeping things simple and avoiding overcomplicating our ideas, right? We're using our KISS technique. So let's talk a bit about the organized way to plan our project. The steps that Jennifer and I are going to discuss for the rest of the presentation today are all elements that you should sit down, think through, and commit to paper to help you plan realistically how you're going to turn your idea into reality, who is going to help you do it, and the timeline that you need in order to get it all done right, while also keeping your sanity. So again, here's our fancy kind of scary terminology. All we want to talk about right now is what is your idea and why are you doing it? So you want to define your idea. What is the purpose and how does it relate to your chapter's mission? What are the goals of your idea? And these are some questions that you can ask yourself to help you figure out what your goals are. What do the participants gain by participating in it? What does the chapter gain from pursuing your idea? How will you identify that your idea was successful? What does success look like for you when you look back at this project that you've put together and completed? This should take 3 to 5 minutes. You're conveying your idea, not defending a dissertation. So don't get stressed here. You're just getting your idea down on paper. And I would encourage you to use SMART goals. I think that term kind of runs around pretty widely, but if you're not familiar with it, SMART is an acronym that encompasses specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-based. So you don't just want to say, I want to have a good event, because how do you quantify that? How do you know when you've achieved that, right? You want it to be specific. I want at least 5 people to come to my event. That's specific, measurable, achievable. You know, if I said I want 50 people to come to my event, I'm not meeting that achievable criteria, right? So just think through about what does a successful event or idea or project look like to you? Before you make a proposal, I would encourage you also just to do a little bit of mental research on your own before you bring it up to the group. So think through, is it possible? Is this feasible? Is my idea reasonable? How much is it going to cost? Does our chapter have budget for this? What are the logistics? Are they going to be really challenging or are they something achievable? Do we have enough people resources in our chapter to pursue this idea in the way that I'm considering it? Do we have the energy to do this? Because we all learned this year. I mean, I think we all know we've gone through periods of burnout and such, but COVID in particular has been constantly needing to determine what our energy level is and how many spoons we have available for JET stuff, right? Are we already working on other things as a chapter and this would just be adding another thing on top of that pile? Or is there anything big coming up where we might start our project but then run into a really big event like our annual Shinenkai, for example, and then get distracted? You don't have to have all of the answers to this, but you want to refine your idea before you bring it to your team, and then they can help you refine it the rest of the way. So I get to introduce my favorite tool now. I'm really nerdy and excited about this. Jennifer, you had something to add?
No, I just love tool time. Let's talk tools.
More power? I don't know if, gosh, now I feel really old. I wonder how many people have even seen, what is the name of that show? Tool
Probably
Time,
not
Tim
enough.
Allen. So this is a generic project scope report that I use this for everything. I use this for work projects. I use this for JET projects. I use this for personal projects when I just need to get my thoughts together. This is literally a template that I found in Microsoft Word. Now I've kind of skinnied it down because some of the elements in it really didn't make sense for JET. They were a little bit more corporate, but if you have Microsoft Word, just go into the template section, type in scope document, and this will pop up. So for the example that we're going to use today is our poor, sad, canceled Yi Hanami. And the reason that I'm super glad to be sharing the stage with Jennifer and Texoma is because of how easy it was for us to plan this cross-chapter event. It was very non-stressful. We had a couple of meetings and all the details had filled themselves out. Now, we didn't utilize this chart. However, our thought process as we met still followed some of these steps. I did not know at the time, in fact, did not know until I invited her to present with me that Jennifer was a project manager, so now it all makes sense. But you'll notice on here that I have a very quick purpose. Why are we doing this? What's the point of me driving 6 Mid-Southers 6 hours to Houston, right? And then what does success look like? What are our goals? So this took me about 3 to 5 minutes, just briefed. So now that we know what the heart of our idea is, it's time to flesh out the backbone and the guts. Your scope is everything. So what is scope? If it's everything, it's very, very important. Scope is what we are going to do in this project, but more importantly, what we are not going to be doing in this project. And I will come back to this idea, it's very important. How do we decide what our scope is? So for those of you who have been JET leaders for a while, you know that IGAs are generally going to start out in one of 2 places or even 2 of those places simultaneously. They tend to be building off the stuff that we already do or all of the amazing new ideas that we have. And this rapidly spirals out of control because we're all amazingly creative people and have amazing ideas and ambitions. Where our scope comes in is reining in our ideas to identify what we can realistically achieve. This is where my favorite technique comes back into play. So you want to take that amazing moonshot pie in the sky idea you have and just think it through and pull it back a little bit. So let's talk about some things that can help us do that. Your scope is going to be constrained by 3 main factors: how much time you have, how much money you have, and how ambitious your scope is. So let's think of a simple example. I want to go to Hawaii. If I decide that I want to leave today, I'd better have a ton of money because plane tickets are going to be astronomical. Now, if I have more time, then I can bring that cost down by shopping around for deals. That one's an easy one. So now let's say I'm going to be in Hawaii for 3 days. I want to plan to visit all of the main islands, learn how to surf, go scuba diving, see Volcano National Park, go on multiple hikes, climb Mauna Loa, and relax all day at the beach with a Mai Tai, which really doesn't sound very reasonable to fit into 3 days, right? Apparently, unless Jennifer is planning the vacation.
You got it.
Now, my JET friends, I say this with the utmost love and about 6 years or so of NatCons under my belt. When we all get together and start planning ideas, they all immediately start to sound like my insanely impossible 3-day trip to Hawaii. Now, while we should continue to dream big, we should do smaller and realistically, because when we dream too big and we try to do everything that we want to do, we don't succeed or we don't succeed fully. And we wear ourselves out, and then we don't have the energy to either try again or to do some other smaller events, right? We need to pace ourselves. So let's set ourselves up to succeed by thinking a little bit more about our constraints. Time. Do we have time to do it right? Now, this is different than do we have time to do it? Do we have time to do it? We can probably make time to do it. Do you have time to do it right while not losing your mind? That's what you need to ask yourself. Are there any competing priorities now or during this project's timeline? Think what I've mentioned earlier, Shinenkai is coming up. You don't want to be halfway through an ambitious project when you have another ambitious project starting. So make sure that you are paying attention to that. Also, we're all human beings and we're all volunteers, so we need to be very conscious if there's any holidays coming up or competing life events that would impact your team. Maybe someone on your board is pregnant. Maybe someone on your board is defending their dissertation, their actual dissertation, not just their project scope. So you want to think about those things as well, because they'll have an impact on your team and their ability to deliver. Cost, is this in our budget? Does our plan give our treasurer time to change the budget if we need to, or to process GIA, because your treasurer will not thank you for a project on March 5th where they're trying to pull all of the documentation together at the last minute? Do we have to give up something else to do this? And are we willing to do that? And is this the highest and best use of our GIA? So this one's kind of an interesting one. You may have a really great idea, but at the end of the day, if it's kind of tertiary to what your mission is as a JET chapter, then you may choose to focus instead on projects and goals and ideas that are more central and will get you more bang for the buck on furthering your mission. And then we have scope. So do we have the resources that we need to achieve our project objectives? Number one, an enticing activity, right? Project owners, a location if you need it, communication and advertising, and volunteers. You'll notice at least 2 of these things are related to people, because people are really critical to being able to get ideas out of the door. So all 3 of these things together relate to our project scope, which we can just think of what we can realistically achieve.
Yeah, so when you talk project management, you usually pick 2. Like you can increase your, if you are willing to take on infinite costs, you can have as much time or scope as you want. If you're willing to take as much time as it takes forever, your costs and your scope can be kept or made larger. So you really pick 2 is what I've always heard. So we'll talk about budget a little bit. As a treasurer, I feel like it's my job to talk about budget. But there's not a whole lot to talk about with it, just because most of the time your costs are set up front, right? Because we have to turn in what we expect to spend before the year starts. So doing research will really help you determine the costs that you expect to incur. Getting specific where you can also will help. So Excel has a whole lot of templates to help you put together budgets. When we did economy, I just freestyled, just opened Excel and made a chart because that's what I like. I believe Megan and I are both chart nerds to some extent. And then just remember, if you've incorrectly assessed the cost of the event, you can scale back, you can cost share, and then you can also just work with your treasurer, because sometimes there is additional money in the budget to make it happen. It just has to be moved around.
Excellent. So one last word on scope, because you're never fully done with scope. You might have thought that you have written out all the things that you are going to do and all the things that you aren't going to do. And actually a slight word on this, just to specify, you want your scope to specifically say, we're going to have this event, and this event will have A, B, and C elements. And we had this great idea to do D and E, but we decided not to do them. And you want to write that down, because there's always someone on the team who's like, I thought we were doing E. And you're like, no, you have to have it written down to avoid scope creep. So I think we're all very familiar with the sweet, tempting words of what scope creep sounds like in our ears. You know what would be cool? Yes, I do know it would be cool. I do know that I don't have time to do it, money to do it, or what's the other one? It's not in the scope, of course. So this is why it's so critical that you decide what is in scope and what is not in scope, and you write it down. And then you have to keep referencing that document so that it's fresh in your mind. Like, oh, no, we decided that we are not doing E, that we don't have time, we don't have the money, or it's too much for us. We don't have the energy right now. Or maybe we'll try it next year. So once you have your scope written down, you want to revisit it. And of course, it's not practical to say that your scope can never, ever change. So what you want to have is some type of process to agree when you want to make changes to your scope. You don't want one person to unilaterally say, hey, by the way, I put down a deposit on idea E, and then you're like, wait, what? You can't just do that. So you want to have a process in place where X number of people will decide it at a meeting, or it must have 2/3 ratification. Whatever it is for you guys, just make sure that you're actively making the decision to change your scope. So this is a quick glance at my economy scope, right? Things that are in In scope are that we're going to find a location for our picnic. Texoma is going to do that. Texoma is going to provide the perishable items. Mid-South is going to provide the non-perishable items and drive 6 hours to get out there. Things that are excluded from scope. We decided that chapters were not going to subsidize. We were going to go to a Gangnam spa. There was going to be some onsen action involved. Still very sad about that. Chapters would not be subsidizing the spa. Obviously, that is not in GIA, but also we were not going to be subsidizing meals for JETs either. It was too complicated and we didn't want to deal with it. Participants could not make changes to the planned itinerary. So that was mostly from my side. Like if my people from New Orleans decided they wanted to go to a different restaurant, well, too bad, so sad, you're out of luck. So, all right, Jennifer, take it away on people and their importance.
So when you've got your scope in place, you need to make sure to consider your people resources, kind of like what Megan was saying earlier. There's a lot of different roles that should be considered for that or for your events and plans. So you want to consider your contributors who are going to make things happen, task completers, so people who are really good at getting discrete items done, checking the boxes as it were, a planner or scheduler who not only looks at the schedule as a whole of your event, and by event, I mean planning and execution, but also someone who can kind of keep people on task and say, hey, you said you would have this in by Monday. It is now Wednesday. What's going on? Do we need to readjust, recalibrate? Can we fit it into the original plan? It's good to have a topical expert who knows or has done this before. A pollster. So someone, and I've never heard anyone call it a pollster. This is my words. But basically someone who's willing to go and talk to the community or talk to JETAA leadership or check with your potential attendees and get feedback where it's needed. Finally, you'll want to have a historian, so someone who's going to keep a record of what you're doing and what you did. A lot of times that will be your secretary. Sometimes it's not. Really, with these roles, they're not fixed. They can change from project to project, and chances are you'll be wearing at least 2 hats, but more likely 5, because we just don't have that many people resources to get these things done. So if you look at my sheet, I also have something called a project champion, which is something that I learned about at work, and I think makes a lot of sense for JETAA. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about what that is, because it has nothing to do with the Olympics. So a project champion is the person in your organization who makes sure that everyone's behind the success of your project or event. They're going to eliminate internal obstacles. So, you may run into external obstacles where, I don't know, you've got your event planned and you find out that you're over capacity and they say, can't do. So that's not what your project champion is there to fix. They're there to look internally and identify potential issues that you might find from people not being available or, needing notes taken and the person who was going to do it isn't there. So they will help facilitate finding a person who will do that role. They help ensure accountability, and they don't actually work on the project, but they are on the front lines and they know what's going on. I find that the project champion is typically someone who is a motivational, inspirational type of person that can get everybody jazzed about the future of whatever it is you're doing. So for our ill-fated economy, Andy was my project champion. I don't think I ever called him that, but he totally was. So he was really good at getting people excited about it and making things happen. So I really appreciate him for that. So I've put this lovely picture of Totoro tooting a horn because they are your kind of your champion for the project.
That looks just like Andy.
Horn and everything. So continuing along on the same track. So once you've got all your roles figured out, you can create accountability with your team by clarifying those roles up front. So instead of just assuming that someone's going to take notes because they're the treasurer, you tell a person, hey, you're the person who takes notes for this. So you would put them on the chart as the note taker. So we're going to talk a little bit about RACI charts, which I've used before, but RACI's an acronym, just like KISS, but a totally different one. So your R is for responsible. This is the person who completes the work. By the way, the quiz will be about this, so listen and think about these things. A is accountable, so that's the person who's ultimately accountable for the event. There should only be one. Consulted are people who review and provide feedback. They're your experts. And then the informed are those that need to be kept in the loop, but you're not asking for feedback from them. So we're going to do a RACI chart. We are going to identify clear tasks and deliverables from the project scope. Do a dummy check to make sure we've identified all the players and actions, and then review the list with the team to make sure you have buy-in. And I'm sorry, we're not actually going to do all of these things. We're just going to make the chart, but all of these things are very important. So if you've seen Boromir in the corner, we're doing a Lord of the Rings themed thing. So let's get started. So let me get going. All right. So the Lord of the Rings is actually a successful project. You probably didn't know this. It was hiding this whole time. That was Game of Thrones. You were right, Alan. I'm sorry, but he's also Boromir, so I'm not 100% wrong. So there's a neat video by this lady named Megan McInerney. McInerney, sorry, can't say her name. If you look at the YouTube link at the bottom of the presentation, it's her talking. But as a thought exercise, she developed a RACI chart for the Lord of the Rings. So we're going to follow along with that. So we're going to start with Gandalf, our project leader, who's gathering everyone. And he's going to tell everybody, put aside your differences and let's do this project. If you will go to the next one, we've got tasks. Oh, go back one.
Sorry.
Okay, so we had our team in mind, and we've got figured out what our deliverables are. So I've pre-populated these. If I actually asked you guys to give me deliverables, we would be here for about 12 hours because the movies are very long. So our deliverables are going to be, one, to decide what to do with the ring, create the fellowship, get the ring to Mount Doom, and as a fun one, distract and defeat enemies. So let's look at who's going to be responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed for the first two tasks, and I'll walk you through why. So firstly, we've got decide on what to do with the ring. So Elrond is responsible for making the decision of what to do with it. Aragorn and Frodo provide feedback on what to happen. You may recall them putting in some information. They're consulted, so they've got the C. Sam just kind of hangs out, if I remember right. So he's informed. He just is there. He knows what's going on, but he's not giving any feedback. And finally, Gandalf is our accountable. Remember, only one. He's the one that calls everybody together and gets participation, driving our team to produce results. So next item, create the fellowship. So now that they've made the decision on what to do with the ring, they're going to create the fellowship. So Gandalf is going to help the team work through their differences with Frodo and Elrond and in charge. So Gandalf is going to be accountable, and Frodo and Elrond are responsible yet again. Finally, Sam and Aragorn are asked if they want to be in the fellowship. So they are both consulted for this. So the next task is to get the ring to Mount Doom. So take a minute and think about who is responsible in this case. And I will remind you, if you have not seen Lord of the Rings, Elrond is going to be busy with his day job and will not be making the trip. And then also remember, only one person will be accountable. So if you, in the chat, please put the two people who you think are responsible. And I realize that's a hint. So you have a minute. I'll count it down.
Do you want to hum the Jeopardy theme or should I? All right. Sorry for our non-Lord of the Rings fans. So we're getting Frodo and Sam, Frodo and Aragorn, Frodo and Sam, Frodo and Aragorn seems to be our mix in here.
Okay.
We've got a direct movie quote from Lucas, which I love.
That actually made it into the, I'll talk about that a little bit too, I think. That's okay. I
think we've gotten some consensus, Jennifer.
I think so. So I think that's been about a minute. So you can go ahead and show the answer now that everybody had already seen it.
Oh,
Oh,
that's
that
me.
was too. Okay.
Too far.
Well, that's okay.
Sorry.
We're gonna go back and show that too. So our accountable is Gandalf. He's staying in the same role. I know he's not there, but it's still ultimately his responsibility. And I realize I just used the word responsibility, but it's not actually responsible. So it is a little confusing, but just think about the guy who's ultimately top dog. And responsible is actually only Frodo. And the reason that is, and kind of what you were saying earlier, I believe, about only Frodo can actually carry the ring. No one else can do it.
Yeah, Lucas, direct quote, "I can't carry the ring, Mr. Frodo, but I can carry you."
Right. So that's why we have Sam and Aragorn as consulted in this one, because they are helping, but they are not carrying. And then Elrond hanging out still in Rivendell, he's just informed.
I think one comment that would make it very clear the difference between accountable and responsible is that your boss is ultimately accountable to the business for what their team produced, but your boss is not actually doing the work, right? So the person who's responsible is fingers on the keyboard doing the work, but your boss, if their team screws up, is ultimately accountable or does really well, right? Let's be positive. Your boss is accountable for the outcome of the
you
work.
will also get the praise if you do the work. So okay, so Gandalf has taken a break for a while to meet an old acquaintance and get a new title, but yes, he is still accountable for the project as a whole. So there's one more task: distracting and defeating enemies. I'm just going to show you the responses on this one. So Elrond is not going on the trip, and Frodo is busy dealing with the burden of carrying the One Ring. So he's going to be he will not be responsible in this regard. So in this one, you'll notice that nobody is accountable, and that's okay. Sometimes you can't hold or have an accountable person, because honestly, they didn't plan like, oh, the enemies are going to come up at this time and we will deal with it then. So Elrond stays informed. The chart showed that Frodo is informed, but depending on how you see him dealing with ring wraiths up on the top of a mountain, I think you could also argue that he was consulted. And interesting bit, so one of the other things the video talked about is that Samwise actually steps in as project manager in the middle because Gandalf leaves. So he kind of keeps the team together at that point.
The keys on this guy, like, putting aside for our friends who haven't seen Lord of the Rings, right? You want to know what are your key tasks? And for us, it's primarily who is responsible for them is the number one takeaway that you want here. But your informed and consulted are also really important as well. Like, is there anybody else that needs to know what we're doing, or is there some type of subject matter expert that we need to be available to answer our questions? So you're just thinking through all of the people that potentially need to be involved in your project, assigning responsibility, but being aware of everybody else as well.
Thanks for the input, Megan. I think with that, we'll talk about my last thing on people. So I think one challenge that we have seen in 2020, and it's kind of been alluded to in our prior discussions, but the fact that virtual events allow us to reach more people in remote areas is a really big strength. And I would encourage everybody to remember that there are other organizations out there that can be collaborated with even more easily thanks to Zoom. In doing research for this, I found out there are 38 chapters of the Japan America Society, which I had no idea. Remember your Friends of Jets, the Japan American Citizens League. Schools is another one that I don't know if we really get tapped into, but there's a lot of opportunities for collaboration.
Jennifer, just to do a time check, we have about 5 minutes left. So we'll
Oh, crap.
spend the bulk of that on the risk management piece.
Okay.
And then I'll just put in a couple words on our last two items.
Sure. So with risk management, you can't really plan for every possible emergency, but you should identify threats. The biggest categories that you want to think of for risk are human capital, financial risks, hazards, safety, and technology. And it's not important to address risks that are low impact and low likelihood, but you do want to address anything with a medium to high impact and a medium to high likelihood. And I know human capital sounds like a strange way to call it a risk, but that would be your volunteers not showing up. A hazard would be inclement weather, and technology risk is real right now. For example, if this Zoom call, the person hosting its computer died, it would be a major risk to this event. So I'm sure they had a contingency plan in place for it. So let's look at some examples. I'm going to talk about economy very shortly again. So some risks that we thought up of were people responding people who responded that they would attend, not actually attending, rainy weather, and a joke item about doing an undokai event. So let's put them on this chart. So
Sorry.
So I put these different risks in categories. So attendees no showing, I would say that's a possible but acceptable risk. It's a pretty standard for any event. An unacceptable possible risk would be a rainy day, and an intolerable and probable risk would be if we made a human pyramid. So continuing on, let's make contingency plans. So for the one that of people not showing up, we're not going to worry about a contingency plan for that because our event, our project can bear that. For rainy weather, we had a mitigation plan in place to either accept the risk. If rain's expected to be short and the duration is short, we can use an outdoor area at the park. If it's going to rain all day, we have an alternate plan in place to do board gaming. And then for the human pyramid option, we just decided not to do it, except I never brought it up because I knew we wouldn't do it in the first place. It's really silly. So risk planning is useful and sometimes fun for chart nerds, but it does take a lot of time. I do recommend taking time to collaboratively discuss risks. Note collaboratively, don't do this in a vacuum. Discuss risks with your JETAA board, especially ones that you think have a medium to high probability and a medium to high impact.
Again, the chart's not necessary. I love the chart because I like charts, but the chart is not necessary. So you don't have to have it in this particular format. Just jot down a couple ideas on a sheet of paper about what could go wrong and then jot next to it what you're going to do if that happens. Very informal, but important for you to think through. You don't want to be discovering a risk when it happens to you halfway through your project planning rather than having considered that it could have happened before you started.
You'll probably notice too that COVID is not on my chart. You're supposed to do risk planning at the beginning, but it is important to review your risk plan and consider additional risks as time goes on. In the case of economy, COVID happened, so we were impacted by a risk, so we canceled the event.
So we have two last items, and these, you already have all of the tools that you need. These are just items to help you wrap up your process. So maintenance and control is the step where you're just looking back at the scope document that we've been creating, and the finalized scope document is in that Slack channel where you can look through and see the whole scope document example for our economy. But as you have meetings, you're going to want to make sure that you're checking that scope, make sure that you're still on your timeline, and then be reviewing. This is a little bit small, but one chart is ongoing action items items. So what item is it? Who's responsible? When's the due date? And how's it going? What is the status? And then setting next steps as well. So there's ongoing items that hopefully are being finished, and then you're going to be adding new items as you go through. So making sure that those new items are within the scope, assigning them to somebody so you make sure that they're getting done and that you have accountability. So you want to keep that going every time you guys have conversation about your project to make sure it stays on track. And then after your project is done, I know it's very tempting to just be like, and I'm going home to drink some wine or sake or whatever your liquor of choice is. However, you should at some point after you've had a chance to decompress, do a bit of a postmortem. It's a very bleak term for it, but basically just look at your event and ask your team members what worked really well for us, and we want to make sure that we continue doing it in the future, and what didn't go so well for us, and how do we think that we can tackle it better next time. And this is also a really great time for you to call out anything, any places where your team members went above and beyond or did a really great job or saved the event. Like, give people kudos, because that thanks and that appreciation makes it a really positive experience and energizes people for the next one. And one other important comment on that is this postmortem is not a blame session. You want to talk about things that didn't go very well, but in a very abstract sense of how can we as a team overcome it next time. We're not laying blame. We're not looking for things to be upset about. So this is ultimately a positive experience and a growth experience, not a negative or a blameful experience.
Yeah, you can also use the RACI chart, looking at your assigned roles and responsibilities to see if people responsible for the tasks did what their task was, or if there are more people that need to be involved next time.
So I want to close out. If you guys walk away with anything else from this session, I think you probably know where this is going. Use the KISS method. Just set yourselves up to succeed by choosing a project scope that is realistically achievable, and you'll find that you have more successes, more energy for more ideas, and more successes in those ideas as well. And I know we're right at the top of the hour. I am happy to stay and answer any questions if anyone has them. We also have the Slack channel that we're going to be monitoring for the next couple of days, NatCon 2020-project management. So we're happy to answer any questions in there as well.
We will also be having breakout rooms tomorrow as well, with each of these topics as a room. So if the presenters are available and willing, they can also do some one-on-one questions.
Absolutely. Thanks for the reminder, Adam.